Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into one of the absolute most fascinating mysteries hidden beneath the waves, extreme marine longevity. Human beings spend billions, literally billions of dollars, searching for the fountain of youth. But it turns out the ocean might have already figured it out, and in several completely different ways.
I mean, we've all wondered at some point, right? Can we actually cheat death? For us, human aging is just this unavoidable biological problem. Our cells degrade, our systems slow down, and our biological clocks eventually run out. But when we look to the ocean, we see marine organisms that completely defy these rules. They aren't just living a long time, their biology is actively resisting, slowing down, or even reversing the aging process entirely. It's wild.
Just think about the number 220 for a second. There are creatures in our oceans right now that can easily live 220 years, like certain whales and sponges, or even upwards of 500 years if we're talking about the ocean quahog. To put that into perspective, that means there are animals swimming or resting in the deep dark right this second that were alive well before the invention of the light bulb. This staggering number really sets the stage for our deep dive today into how exactly certain marine species pull off these incredible lifespans. Okay, let's get right into it. First, we'll look at epigenetic clocks in whales. Then we'll check out sponges and syncytial tissues. After that, we'll meet the immortal jellyfish. And finally, we'll wrap up by exploring what it takes to unlock biological immortality. Starting right off with Section 1, epigenetic clocks in whales. Our first protagonist here is the truly majestic bowhead whale. This incredible creature is thought to be the longest-lived extant mammal on Earth, with lifespans stretching up to a mind-blowing 211 years. But for a long time, the really tricky part for wildlife management was figuring out how scientists actually know a living whale is that old in the first place. Well, that brings us to DNA methylation. The easiest way to think about this is like internal biological tree rings that scientists can read. Basically, it's a biological process where chemical markers attach themselves to DNA, which then affects gene expression. Over time, these patterns change in highly predictable ways. We've seen strong correlations between these methylation patterns and chronological age in both humans and non-human vertebrates. So researchers can use this to construct a highly accurate internal epigenetic clock. The real breakthrough, though, is how researchers are actually applying this science in the field. In the past, aging large marine mammals, especially ones with lifetimes way longer than a human researcher's entire career, was incredibly difficult. But recent research shows how scientists have now validated multiple different epigenetic clocks. And the absolute best part? They can do this using remote skin biopsies. It's a minimally invasive technique that doesn't harm the animal at all. A total game changer. So just contrast the old methods with the new ones for a second. Historically, to estimate a whale's age, scientists basically had to rely on lethal methods or harvesting from carcasses. Examining growth layers in teeth, measuring baleen plates, or testing aspartilic acid in eye lenses. Kind of grim, right? Now, utilizing these epigenetic clock biomarkers from just a tiny, harmless skin swab, they can estimate a bowhead or killer whale's age with a median error of just 2 to 3 years. It is an incredible leap forward for marine conservation and for understanding exactly how these massive mammals pace their cellular aging. All right, moving on to Section 2, sponges and syncytial tissues. Let's transition a bit deeper into the ocean. We're heading down to depths of 30 to 60 meters in the freezing fjords of British Columbia, Canada, to examine the completely alien-like glass sponges, specifically a species called Rhabdicaliptus dowsoni. You really have to appreciate the sheer scale of these deep-sea creatures. They formed this rough, vase-like tube with a massive cavity. While the average length is around 32 centimeters, they can actually reach almost a full meter in length. Their tissue is white and hangs in this spooky cobweb-like fashion over a skeleton of spicules. But what makes them truly fascinating isn't just their size, it's how their bodies are actually put together. And that brings us to syncytial tissues. Now, unlike most sponges, or really most animals in general, whose bodies are made up of distinct, separate cellular tissues, glass sponges have a continuous, multinucleated cellular structure. It's essentially a giant, continuous cellular highway. This structure allows them to rapidly propagate electrical signals through their entire body to coordinate things, like instantly stopping their feeding current if they need to. It's just a completely different anatomical blueprint from what we're used to. And their survival strategy? It's incredibly patient. Just 1.98, that is the average growth in centimeters per year for these sponges. Talk about a masterclass in slow and steady survival, right? This ultra-slow metabolism is perfectly suited for their deep water fjord environments where they literally just sit and slowly filter feed decade after decade. So if we look at their overall deep-sea survival toolkit, it's pretty wild. They grow in patchy distributions, and despite being so deep underwater, they definitely experience distinct seasonality. They actually slough off their debris-covered outer spicules during the winter months right after the seasonal phytoplankton blooms end. Plus, if they get artificially wounded, they use streams of cytoplasm from that syncytial tissue we talked about to regenerate 40 times faster than their normal growth rate. Combine all that with their indeterminate, slow growth, and researchers estimate a 1-meter sponge is easily 220 years old. Which brings us to the climax of the explainer, Section 3, the immortal jellyfish. We've seen mammals that pace their lives out over 2 centuries and deep-sea sponges that slowly endure for just as long. But now it's time to meet Turritopsis dohrnii, an animal that has seemingly conquered biological death entirely. The absolute secret to its immortality lies in this really dense scientific term, transdifferentiation. But let's simplify it. Imagine playing a video game where, right as your character is about to die, you can just hit the reset button and start the entire game over, keeping all your original potential. That's functionally what this jellyfish does. When it's faced with environmental stress, physical assault, sickness, or just plain old age, its fully differentiated adult cells alter their state. They transform into entirely new, undifferentiated stem cells. It literally resets its epigenetic state. Let's walk through how this creates a looping, essentially infinite life cycle. It starts out like a normal hydrozoan. A tiny planula larva settles on the seafloor and becomes a branched polyp colony. Those polyps eventually bud off into the classic free-swimming jellyfish we all recognize, called a medusa. But here is the magic trick. If they encounter stress or old age, instead of dying, they undergo that transdifferentiation. They revert completely back into the polyp colony stage. They effectively become a baby again. As experts note, theoretically, this process can go on indefinitely. Think about that. It has no maximum lifespan. Now, to be completely clear, they aren't physically invincible. In the wild, most of these tiny jellyfish, and they are tiny, only about 4.5 millimeters wide, will get eaten by predators like sea turtles, tuna, or even other jellyfish, or they might succumb to disease. But from a purely biological aging standpoint, they have literally defeated time. And that brings us to our final section, unlocking biological immortality. So what does the ocean's wildly diverse toolkit for longevity actually mean for science at large? And why should we care? Bringing it all together, we can really see 3 distinct tiers of extreme longevity here. You have the bowhead whale, utilizing incredibly stable epigenetic pacing to endure for 211 years as a complex, warm-blooded mammal. Then, the glass sponge uses its unique, continuous syncytial tissue structure and exceptionally slow metabolic growth to easily hit 220 years. And finally, Turritopsis dohrnii just completely abandons a linear lifespan altogether, using transdifferentiation to achieve true biological immortality. Which leaves us with a really provocative question. Researchers are actively studying Turritopsis dohrnii right now to understand exactly how it resets its epigenetic state, because functionally, this transdifferentiation process closely resembles the reprogramming of mammalian cells. If we can map out how it manages its telomeres and reprograms its cells, could we eventually apply those same principles to human regenerative medicine? I mean, the ocean has clearly already solved the puzzle of aging in more ways than one. The only question now is, when will we learn how to translate those secrets for ourselves? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely stay curious.